We'll be starting our presentation very shortly, waiting for everyone to join the lobby. Please be patient. Good evening. We are waiting for everyone to join the lobby before we start our presentation.
Maybe it's time for us to get started. Shall we get the show on the road, Brian?
Good evening. My name is Firefighter Brian Anderson. I'm the curator of Fireman's Hall Museum. Tonight is the beginning of our one of 4 membership meetings that we have. We have an excellent presentation for you tonight. Just please keep in mind that any donations, the museum functions off of donations. Please don't hesitate to donate. Or if you have friends or somebody else that you know that may consider becoming a member of Fireman's Hall Museum, please direct us either online or to the gift shop. I'll now turn the mic over to Carol, who will introduce our guest for tonight.
It is my pleasure to introduce Timothy Winkle. Tim is a curator with the Division of Cultural and Community Life at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. He is responsible for the collection, display, and interpretation of American firefighting history at the museum, as well as other areas such as the history of law enforcement and community organizations, scouts, and fraternal groups. Tim has a bachelor's degree in English and history from the College of William and Mary and holds 2 master's degrees, one in popular culture history from Bowling Green State University, and one in museum studies from University College London. Before working at the Smithsonian, Tim was a cataloger at the Library and Museum of Freemasonry in London. He began working at the National Museum of American History in 2005, processing the firefighting donations from the Cigna Corporation, and became a curator in 2010. Tim is currently working on research around early African-American participation in firefighting, as well as the role of fraternal societies in the creation of some of the first museums in the United States. Tim has long been a friend of Fireman's Hall Museum, and we are delighted to have him join us, even virtually. Tim?
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending tonight. I'll try and be as interesting and as formative as I can, but if there's anything, any questions you want to ask after the presentation, I'm open for as as much Q&A as you like. So, but without further ado, let me go ahead and do a little technological doodabbery here and get my slideshow going here. Okay. We all good? Yeah, okay. So as Carol said, I came on to work with the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian in 2005, I guess technically late 2004. And it was to begin to work on the donation, mostly firefighting material from Cigna, based in Philadelphia. And after about nearly 5 years of that, I was hired as a full-time curator. I was given firefighting since I had worked so long on that. I have no background in firefighting other than on-the-job training for half a decade before that point. And law enforcement was added to that as a sort of complementary area, and obviously any form of first response. And beyond that, because I had worked with fraternal history back in London, I was given community groups as well. So I'm also the guy who does Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, all types of things like that. But firefighting, I would say, is my primary, or at least has been over the last 10 years, I would say, has been my primary collection, my primary area of curation. And really, there's been firefighting history at the Smithsonian pretty much from the beginning, but we can look at it as kind of two different periods. From around 1883, so quite a long time ago, 140 years ago, to about 2005, and then from 2005 onward. And that 2005 point is really the Cigna donation. But let me start with some of the collections that have been here before that time. So the Smithsonian and later the National Museum of American History had firefighting, as I said, pretty much since the beginning. The Smithsonian Institution, little known fact, actually didn't begin as a museum. The first secretary, Joseph Henry, really wanted it to just be a scientific institution, and was reluctant, even opposed to the collection of museum artifacts around American history. But the second secretary, Spencer Baird, expanded our remit to become a historical collecting body as well. And in 1883, the thing that kind of jump-started that was the Smithsonian took on the holdings of the National Institute for the Promotion of Science, which was kind of a proto-Smithsonian. They were trying to be the Smithsonian. They were trying to get that money that James Smithson had donated. And they had their own museum at the Patent Office in Washington, D.C. And this museum had lots of important artifacts, but once the Smithsonian shifted to historical collection, it was decided to assume those. And amongst that collection, that's where we got things like George Washington's military uniform, Ben Franklin's printing press. One of the objects in that collection from the National Institute was a silver presentation trumpet from Anacostia Engine No. 3 in Washington, D.C. So right from the beginning of historic collection, firefighting has been part of our history. So when the National Museum of American History opens in 1964, almost a century later, there's obviously already objects that have been collected over time related to fire history. But really until 2010, and basically until I was hired on as a curator, there was never a specific firefighting collection or curator, that was dedicated to that topic. I kind of take that back. Jane Rogers, who was among other things in charge of firefighting curation, that was one of her remits too. But there wasn't a specific collection. So I'm the first curator who also has a named firefighting collection within the Smithsonian. So we really made a pointed effort at that point to collect it as a separate topic. So basically, yeah, there's been firefighting in the collection for about 150 years. Fire objects before 2010, before this collection, this named collection, were held in a variety of divisions and in a variety of different collections. They were kind of, you could kind of find them wherever. So on the right, the top right there, that's a fire alarm street box from Boston, one of the original street boxes that was set up, originally installed in 1851, and the mechanism inside dates to 1866. So that's a very early telegraphic fire alarm system from Boston, which was the pioneer. It's part of the first practical fire alarm system. It was set up by Channing and Farmer, and that is still with us today. That is with the electrical collection, or the electricity collection, in what's called the Division of Work and Industry. So there's fire history, but as a technology. Likewise, we have the Division of Work and Industry has blank fire badges from a button factory to show manufacture and industry, but weren't collected because they were fire history. So let's see here. So here are two objects that I have on display right now, actually. And they've been in the Smithsonian's collection since 1900. Again, we've got some very old material. So one on the left, my left anyway, is a blank for the Bennett Medal, which is given for bravery in the New York Fire Department. And that dates to the late 1860s. And so does the pin, which is one of the commissioner's pins for the new Metropolitan Fire Department that was established in 66. They both were designed by Tiffany and Company. They both belong to a man named Theodorus Bailey Myers. But again, like other fire objects in the collection, they weren't collected as examples of fire history. They came with a donation of family history by his daughter, a woman named Cassie Myers Mason Julian James, very long name. And for many decades, they were held just as cultural history, not fire history, just cultural history. Another collection that has a fairly good representation of fire history is our photographic history collection. So on the top here, that's a daguerreotype from the 1850s, taken in Philadelphia. I don't know if you can read the velvet, but it was taken at a studio in Philadelphia, and Willard, and shows two firemen with cigars. We don't know who they are. We don't know what company they're from. They're probably not from Philadelphia. They might be from one of the towns in the area, one of the, hook and ladder number one of X town, and have come to the city for their photograph. And then on the bottom there, there's another major collection of photography held in our archive center called the Skurlock Collection. The Skurlock Collection includes thousands of photographs and negatives from the Skurlock's photo studio in Washington, D.C., which was the preeminent photo studio for Washington's African-American community, basically for almost the entirety of the 20th century. And here is a photo from 1930 of Engine Company Number 4, which was the first all-black fire company in Washington, D.C., and that was begun in 1919. So photographic resources are something we've always had a lot of. And of course, we have lots of fire apparatus, even before 2005, including, this is the 1878 Clappin Jones steam fire engine. It was from Frederick, Maryland. It's known as Lily of the Swamp. Now here you see it on loan to the Fire Museum of Maryland, which is where it is currently residing. In addition, the museum has another steam pumper, which is an American LaFrance Metropolitan from 1900, as well as a Hunneman hand pumper, a horse-drawn ladder truck, and a gasoline-powered American LaFrance from the 1920s. So these were all originally collected. All these vehicles and apparatus were collected, again, prior to 2005. They were collected within the Division of Work and Industry, and they were part of the transportation collections. And actually, they were actually curated under the railroad collections. The railroad curator had responsibility for fire vehicles. I do not know why. All I know is that fire history in the museum has often been the responsibility of whoever was willing or interested. And so a lot of these things are sometimes historic oddities as to why one collection takes them over versus another. Probably the last major collecting effort around firefighting before 2005 was the museum's work around September 11th. In December of 2001, Congress designated the museum as the official repository of the history of 9/11, and but museum curators were already collecting from sites of the attacks in New York and in Pentagon and in Shanksville, and first responders, particularly in New York, were a primary focus of collecting. So this is one of the largest pieces from that collecting effort. This is a door from a rescue pumper that belonged to Brooklyn Squad 1, which was a Special Operations Command unit in the FDNY. And Squad 1 lost 12 members of that unit on 9/11. So, as I said, the reason that 2005 sort of marks the new period in collecting fire history at the Smithsonian is, as many of you know, that's the year that we received our donation from the Cigna Corporation. Cigna donated specific objects to a number of institutions, including Fireman's Hall, Atwater Kent, Pennsylvania Historical Society, and they later donate sort of small batches of objects that were already on loan to a number of museums. I think at least 12 or 14 other museums retained their what were initially loans from Cigna. But the bulk of the donation, which is around 5,000 objects, and all the books and archives and catalog information related to those objects goes to the National Museum of American History. So there you can see on the side, I like this little grouping because there is that copper steam pumper in the portrait. There it is on one of the conference tables at INA headquarters. There it is being unpacked at the museum, and there is my glamour photo of it in the collections. So Cigna, of course, is a merger of Connecticut General and the Insurance Company of North America. So before that, INA is actually the nation's oldest capital stock company. It's founded in 1792. And it begins with maritime insurance, and they donated a significant amount of maritime objects as well. But they expand quickly into fire insurance by 1794. And then, over the next century plus, they build an in-house collection that's mostly related to their corporate history, but some to their fire and maritime business. But then their collecting really takes off, as far as I can tell from their records and from the cataloging that we see. It really takes off in the 20th century. That seems to be mainly tied to when INA builds its new headquarters at 1600 Arch Street, and they really want to fill it. This grand building, as you can see, two shots from that building, they really want to fill it with fire history and with maritime history. And so, they really move to up their collecting at that point. And this is a pretty common practice. Insurance companies like Home Insurance in New York and Equitable in Baltimore, they have similar collections. And to some extent, they're competing with each other. There's kind of these signs of corporate status. And the timing is really right as well, because, of course, by the 1920s, the last of the 19th century volunteers are passing away. That even that last generation that was young in the 1860s and 1870s are passing. Their families are sometimes seeing objects related to their fire service get into the antiques market that way. Companies are retiring obsolete equipment like old pumpers and old steamers. And then in the beginning of the 1930s, in 1929, the Depression hits, and material is even more available for sale in those years before World War II. So, in this kind of 2-decade time period, INA is really able to amass a nationally significant collection of fire history. We'll see that hand pumper, that Philadelphia-style pumper again in a little bit. And there's the Silsbee steam engine behind those fellas, and a little peek into the museum. I'll flash forward here. Flash forward to the 2000s. So now INA is merged to create Cigna, and Cigna is a health insurance company, and they don't do fire insurance anymore. And so the historic collections don't have a lot of relevance for their, for the corporate plan, basically. They begin to see it more as an asset, than a legacy. So they do sell some discrete collections. They sell their Pennsylvania Impressionist art collection. But and the fire collection might have gone the same way, but thankfully the curators at Cigna, Melissa Hupp and Sue Levy, are able to convince them that they should really donate those historic collections, again, to key Philadelphia and Pennsylvania institutions, but also to the nation. And so I always credit them a lot with, practically with my job, because if it wasn't for this donation, I might not be here. So there's a bit, and then you can see this is what they were. I think this was the site visit. In fact, I think that's Jane Rogers there in one of the pictures, and behind her, our maritime curator, Paul Johnston. This is some of the displays and then some of the storage of the material. And if I looked at it with a microscope, I could probably tell you every one of those objects on that rack. I could probably find it in my crates. So like I said, the museum received some 5,000 objects. It was about 300 crates of material. And it wasn't just always straightforward. I mean, we had objects as small as buttons and as large as button hand pumpers. So take these fire apparatus. Cigna donated a total of 10 fire vehicles of different sizes and shapes. Everything from the little two-person hand engine you see up there on the right, all the way down to the Silsbee steamer, which is behind the Rini Nefi steamer there on the bottom right. And they're all over the place. So the steamer and the Aaron's Fox at the time are in Connecticut. The button pumper is in New Jersey. Stuff is in Philadelphia. One hand engine was even on loan on a traveling exhibit, and so we didn't see it for a year. It finally came in its crate when it was finally, no longer needed for display. And the Philadelphia hand pumper that we saw earlier in the black and white photos. So one day my colleague and I are working at our offsite facility, and there's a knock on the door, and it's a trucker with a shipment. Turns out it's that hand pumper, and it has no wheels on it. They took the wheels off to rig it and ship it. So the two of us are staring at each other. They had expected a rigging crew on the other side, and we're looking at each other going, how are we going to get this off this truck? Fortunately, one of our offsite guys came, and he's a whiz with a forklift, and we were able to safely do it. But it was one of the more memorable days of my time working with this collection. So the big job has been processing the collection, right? So I myself ended up processing the collection for almost 5 years. Some of that time I had a partner with me, a colleague with me, but for about 2/3 of that time I did it by myself. And the first step was to unpack each one of those 300 crates and confirm the contents and the donation list. And so once this was done, the donation could be officially received. So essentially we did an inventory, or a receipt inventory on the back end. Now the initial unpacking comes at the museum. So 2005, we retrofitted an unused activity space that had a big plate glass window there. And we turned it into our work area. And so visitors could come and literally see the objects as we saw them, as we took them out of the box and saw them for the first time. If you were at that window, you were seeing them along with us for the first time. I always like to joke we were kind of like the pandas at the zoo there. It's a very disconcerting way to work, actually. But in 2006, the museum underwent a major renovation. And so this area was closed. This area that we're working in now is basically the chamber for the Star Spangled Banner now. So if you've been to the museum, or if you plan to go at some time in the future and you go back to see the Star Spangled Banner, you'll be standing looking at it about the place where my colleagues are standing in that picture. So the understanding from the beginning was that the museum wouldn't keep all 5,000 of those objects. So as we unpacked, we were also assessing them, assessing each object to determine whether we would choose to keep it for the collection. And the criteria was sort of like objects that were in poor condition or very poor condition, duplicate objects, objects that didn't meet our collecting needs. These were all sort of noted as potential eventual disposals. And then at the same time, we're also photographing every object we see, we get. You can see the edge of our photo rig there, that umbrella. We photographed each object twice, once with its Signa catalog number because we hadn't cataloged it ourselves yet, one with a Signa catalog number for identification, and one without, so we knew we could use it on the web or as as whatever, as it's kind of a semi-studio shot. So there's at least 2 photos of every object. There's 10,000 photos right there. And then in some cases, we took multiple shots from different angles, inside a hat, inside a helmet, the back of something. And so I'd say conservatively, we generated about 25,000 photos over probably a 2-year period. And all of them, if you go online and look at our catalog, you'll see many of them are those photos we originally took back in 2005, 2006. The last part of the initial processing is to create our archive quality storage for the objects. So when they came in the crates, they come in a variety of off-the-shelf cardboard boxes. Basically, every box, you had a box that was big enough to contain the largest of every type. So every fire helmet came in the same size box that was big enough to accommodate the largest fire helmet from how many there were. And so there wasn't much in the way of customizing any of the packing. So we then created flat templates for all these box sizes and replicated every box in archival cardboard, in acid-free cardboard, something we call blue board. You can see some of the cardboard you see on the bottom row, that's blue board. Doesn't off gas, is acid-free, is good for not forever, but a good long time. And that way, because we replicated the exact size of them, we could just slot them back in their crates. So they come out of the crate in cardboard, they go back in archival cardboard, but the box is the same size. We did reorient the boxes so that they opened at the front rather than from the top. So if you see the white helmet there with the Greyhound shield holder, that's in one of our boxes. We put everything on helmets, hats, other things. We put them on trays that slid out for better access, and so you didn't have to handle the object. We tied them down with archival materials, twill tape, and a kind of a soft foam called Velora. So all the stuff you see, especially in that one picture of the helmet, that's all acid-free archival, nothing cutting into the object, and should be good for years and years to come. But it also means that we don't have to handle the object either. And finally, we made sure that every object in the boxes was secure. You can see the tray holders in the box, because we knew that it would have to move again. And in fact, in 2007, we moved everything from one offsite facility to another one. And so we had to make sure they weren't going to jostle around in the boxes and knock around. So we were really forward thinking the whole time on how we're going to use it. And frankly, 15 years on, we're still using every one of them. Every time I open one, I get wistful. The time I used to make cardboard boxes for a living. So after our assessment, we ended up keeping about exactly, because they're cataloged, 2,268 fire objects. So a little more than half. A little under half, I mean. In some cases, we kept a few examples of a type, and in other cases, we kept almost everything that was donated from a certain type to make sure we had a sort of almost an encyclopedic, or at least a very large representative collection of types of objects. So One of those was the fire marks. We kept 234 fire marks from INA's quite substantial and significant fire mark collection. We kept 77 buckets, fire buckets. Most of those are painted, some of which are 18th century. We kept 89 models, fire apparatus models. And also, as I mentioned, 10 full-size fire apparatus as well. So we have a good, if it's a model or real, we have a good representation of nearly every type of historic fire apparatus. 94 speaking trumpets, and 150 uniform belts. Those just happen to be two of the ones that are curled up. All the rest of them came straight laid out. So that was a challenge to rehouse. And then 86 fire hats and 96 fire helmets. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is helmet, which is a hat. And many, many other things. So axes, lanterns, wrenches, sections of leather fire hose, buttons, badges, trophies, lots of helmet front pieces, a nice collection of fire capes, of panel paintings, of art paintings, and hundreds and hundreds of prints and engravings as well. So, a real, as I said, a real nationally significant collection. So once we determined kind of what the museum would officially keep, once we had assessed that collection, we had a chance now to begin to do two things. We could actually assign catalog numbers and begin entering objects into our system. Now, since these objects were all off-site, back in their crates, all in their archival boxes, a lot of that cataloging was done primarily using the photos we had taken and also using the catalog cards provided by Cigna, most of which dated back to when it was INA. So that meant in a few cases, errors that maybe were on the cards or misidentifications or whatnot, or just not being able to see all of the object because we didn't have it in front of us. So in some cases, errors crept into the cataloging system. So here's my chance to tell you that you can help with that, and I'll show you how to do that later. You can help us fix some of our errors if you see them. The second thing we could do was begin to dispose the objects that we didn't select. And when an object is officially acquired by a museum, it's called accessioning. An object is accessioned. And when you want to dispose of an accessioned object, that's called de-accessioning, the reverse. But it's a long and formal process. It's never done lightly. It's never done easily. We're not meant to be easily disposing of objects that we just don't want anymore. There's a lot of thought and process put into it. And there's two aspects of de-accessioning particularly to keep in mind. Museums are obligated under formal de-accession rules to try to find another institution that might take it before taking further steps. And if an object is disposed of, is de-accessioned for sale, any money raised, well, first of all, it always has to be through private auction or through public auction. It can't just be sold to somebody who wants to buy it. You have to go through auction to get the highest price and to be fair, but also any funds raised through that form of de-accession can only go to acquisition. They can't go to keeping the lights on, paying the curators, giving the director a bonus. They all have to go through acquisition, just to acquisition funds. So now the objects that we didn't select were never formally accessioned. They were acquired but not accessioned. So we own them, but as per the agreement with Cigna, we weren't required to accession everything. And so now we had about 1,600 objects, 1,700 objects that weren't going to stay. And we decided that the proper thing to do would be to try and follow a formal de-accession as much as possible, even though we weren't obligated to. And so the first step in that process is trying to find new homes where we could. And so we actually advertised the availability of all these disposals through the Fire Museum Network and also through contacts within the Fire Museum community. And so this was sort of in my third and fourth year processing this. I worked personally with every museum that contacted us to get a selection of objects together, pack it up, find objects that fit their needs or maybe geographically were appropriate, and then arrange for their pickup. We kept everything as free as possible. If you came into my door, we would arrange to pick it up and you could drive it back to your museum. It worked really well. So we were able to dispose of about 150, 160 objects this way to about 9 different museums and institutions all across the country, all the way from California to Maryland. The remainder of the disposal was sold at auction on November 19th, 2010. So we're coming up on the 10th anniversary at Pook and Pook in Doylestown. And in addition to the fire material, there was a large number of objects related to INA as a company. They had donated pretty much every portrait of their corporate presidents, dating back all the way to the 19th century, to the 18th century. And all this other material related to the company, some maritime material that wasn't taken on board as well by the museum. And the auction for the museum raised over $500,000. And all that was immediately put into an acquisition fund that didn't even earn interest. It was just a static fund that was then used for further acquisitions. And in fact, it's been spent down. So it took, gosh, how long? It took almost 10 years to spend down. But the majority of the money from that fund actually went to acquiring a suit of clothes that had belonged to Benjamin Franklin when he was ambassador to France during the Revolution. And that seemed kind of appropriate, Ben Franklin being so fundamental to the establishment of firefighting in America that it seemed like an appropriate way to use those funds. So even after all that, after the collection is processed and stored and cataloged, there's still always more information. There's always still things happening and more research to do. So one of the best examples I have is related to this pumper. So this is our Button squirrel tail engine. It was purchased by the Christiana Fire Company down in Lancaster in the 1870s. I think it's like 1872. And a couple years, I'm trying to think when this was. I think it was a couple years into, maybe it was about 2012. I was contacted by representatives of the fire company. It's still there today. And they were trying to find their pumper. And they had thought that perhaps the pumper hadn't been sold to Insurance Company of North America, that it had just been put on loan. And they were just trying to check and see if that was the case or not. So I delved into the archives. I found that that INA had indeed purchased it. They purchased it for $400 in 1931. And strangely, they had purchased it with the intention of putting it in Independence Hall. And then somewhere along the line realized it's from the entirely wrong time period. So I don't know where that idea came from, but having this lovely late 19th century hand pumper on their hands, they immediately turned it around and lent it to the North Museum at Franklin and Marshall. And then they pretty much forgot about it. They wrote a letter in the 1960s to the curator of the North Museum. They donated this, they loaned it in the 1930s. And they wrote a letter saying, essentially, how's our pumper doing? We just wanted to check on the pumper. And the curator that wrote back said, well, there's two things. One, the curator you've written to has passed away. And two, we don't have it anymore. But you're lucky because I was a curator before here. I was at the Landis Valley Farm Museum, and I recognize that that's where it went to. So total happenstance allowed them to keep track of this pumper. So yes, it had been at Landis Valley. There, the picture there of the gents operating it, and there it is in a somewhat shabby storage. And in the 1970s, actually, Landis Valley reached out to INA and asked for monies to have it restored, and they did so at a carriage shop in Intercourse, and it looks as it does today in that photo up top. So the unfortunate thing was that yes, INA had purchased the Christiana Fire Company's old pumper, and by this time it had been formally accessioned by the Smithsonian, and to de-accession something like this, we couldn't just de-accession it to a private organization or even a municipal organization like the fire company. We would have to have tried to give it to another museum, whether that's a fire museum or not, or there was just no way, having been de-accessioned, it was going to end up back with these guys, and they understood that. And so we instead, it was kind of for their anniversary, they wanted to display it. My whole studio crew, all 3 guys from our photo studio, came out to the warehouse for an entire day's photo session, and we made that the photo you see at the top. That is a composite photo of an enormous set that we set up at the warehouse. So they did end up with a glamour shot in the end, and I know it wasn't quite as good as the real thing, but at least they didn't go away completely empty-handed. And things like that come up all the time. So, as significant as the donation was from Cigna, the fire collection, and like I say, it kind of marked a new chapter in collecting fire history at the Smithsonian. I've still tried to continue to build the fire history collection whenever and wherever possible. We don't want to sort of rest on our laurels, and one of the reasons for this is that, as great as the Cigna donation was, as great as INA's collection had been, this historic collection, it's got gaps. It's very heavy obviously on Philadelphia fire history, and then beyond that, pretty much the Mid-Atlantic. So it's geographically limited. It's mostly from the 19th century, some early 20th century, some late 18th century, but it's a very good representation of 19th century Mid-Atlantic volunteer firefighting. And because of that limited geography and because of the limits of time, it doesn't encompass the experience, say, of women in firefighting or minority groups in firefighting. And so, we try and tell those stories as well. It's missing types of stuff. We didn't get the photography from the Cigna donation that went to the Pennsylvania Historical Society. So we didn't get much in the way of historic photography. There are areas that INA and then Cigna did not collect, like decorative arts. There's not a lot of that. Popular culture objects related to firefighting. None of those are very well represented at all. And so for these reasons, I've pushed to build on what is in itself a really amazing collection, but in the last decade, we tried to build upon that. Sometimes I've been working with other curators to see where we can fill those gaps and what new stories we can tell. So here on this screen, you'll see the boot there, very common from just a few weeks ago. That was collected. That's a Labor Day Fill the Boot, fundraising object to support the Muscular Dystrophy Association every Labor Day. At least certainly in this area, you see them, firefighters on the street corners, at red lights, soliciting donations. And it was collected along with other material related to it from the Fairfax County Fire Department here in Virginia, which actually has led the nation several times in the past in amount of donations for MDA. And it immediately, as soon as it was collected, went on display in a rotating exhibit on the history of philanthropy and charity in America. So it was immediately used for an exhibition, and we have other boots that we collected along with it that are still in that display. On the top right is a helmet and a turnout coat from a New York firefighter named Guy Warren. So I mentioned that one of the last, before I came on, before Cigna, the last major firefighting collecting had been around 9/11, and those artifacts related to 9/11 are actually kept in another division, the Political and Military History Division. They're their own distinct collection, and they have their own curator, who's not me. So I often say I'm the curator of firefighting in American history, like every day but that day. But that being said, it's still obviously an impactful story for firefighters and first responders. And when Guy reached out to me several years ago to offer up his gear, it was from his service in FDNY. He had retired in the mid-90s, but on that day, on 9/11, he was on the golf course out in Long Island, and he heard the news, and he went home and put on his old gear, got on his Harley, and went into the city to help. And so he donated his, obviously, like I say, his helmet, his turnout coat, his Halligan, a couple other things. And so that gave us, the nice thing about this is it gave us an example of modern fire gear, which we didn't have. You know, the most recent stuff I had was from the 1920s, maybe. And it also gave us that personal story, another story to tell related to that day. So it was a really positive acquisition. And on the bottom there are two props from the TV series Rescue Me. The Halligan's real. The axe is actually like a lighter replica. I think it's like resin. And they were collected not by me, but by our entertainment curators. And it's important, I think, too. You know, we have other things related to the dissemination of firefighting through popular culture, because you know, whether it's old Mose from the 19th century or Tommy Gavin in Rescue Me, you know, most people are going to experience firefighting and take in the you know, the profession and all that comes with it through shows and movies and things like that. You know, your hope is you go through your entire life and never need a fire company to come out and help you. So hopefully your only experience is, it might be through the screen. But that affects how Americans process it, think about its history. So it's important to get these artifacts as well. And then lately, I've been, as Carol said, I've been researching the role of African Americans in early firefighting systems in southern cities like Savannah and Charleston, and I'm very hopeful that we'll have the ability to collect some artifacts around that topic as well, and begin to sort of expand more the stories we can tell within our fire history collection. So another key thing that we've been doing, that I've been trying to do for the past 10 years, has been around audience outreach and about ways to just get the fire collection out in front of people. So done this in a number of ways. Last year, we made nearly every object in the electronic catalog available online to the public, completely searchable. But before that, you know, starting for almost 10 years before that, as we processed the donation, we've been pushing hundreds of fire objects from the collection out onto the web with interpretive labels, so that the public can search it on our database. And even today, I've been expanding and updating records. It's something I did particularly a few months ago under quarantine. I did some really heavy catalog work as well. So let me show you something. Let me just I want to show you a different screen here, so you can do the same thing. So this is our homepage. As you can see, we reopen tomorrow. So everybody come bright and early. And if you are interested in searching the collection, you want to go to Explore History. So it's just americanhistory.si.edu. The first thing you see over here is Search Collections. And you can search in that box, but I recommend just clicking on the get the search screen. So there's the search screen. And you can just put a term in there. It could be fire hat, it could be fire helmet, ladder truck, whatever you want to do. I'll give you one little hint though. If you put in Cigna, every object donated by Cigna has the word Cigna in the catalog record because it's in the credit line. So if I turn on Cigna and just search that term, there we go. There's some of their biotech stuff. There's the Jack Robrecht collection of firefighting photographs that came from the Cigna donation and is now with the Archive Center. We thought it appropriate to name it for Jack. There's some of the maritime stuff that came, all from Cigna. And if I go to like a random number here. Yeah, there we go. So there's some of the models. And every one of these expands. And then every one of them further expands. And if it's something we've done a large interpretive label for, here under some of this, you'll see even more information, and then you can go through multiple images as well. So it's a really good way to research, to see the collection. Like I said, from Cigna, there was 2,200 some objects. There's probably an additional 400 to 500 fire objects in the collection as well. So you're looking at nearly 3,000 objects, and all of them, or nearly all of them, are here to be publicly searched. Let me go back here. So anyway, back to this. So it's a way, it's a nice way to share with the people that aren't at the museum, right? Our biggest audience, as many people as we get in a normal year at the museum, it's 3 times as large as the people that come to our electronic portals. Another way we've done that outreach, as you can see on the top right, electronic outreach is through the blog. Our blog is called Oh Say Can You See? And I've, in the last 10 years, I've produced several blogs on fire history, from the development of the 911 system to 19th century fire company mottos, to even a blog on the fire that destroyed the original Smithsonian Castle in 1865. And just like with the public catalog, it's a way to reach beyond the walls of the museum. Now, if you're within the walls of the museum, there's lots of opportunities as well to share the collection. I've organized several out of storage days where we bring some of the collection out and share it with visitors one-on-one. And I've also worked with our education department and our other Smithsonian offices to produce special events that utilize the collection. So there at the bottom right, that is a comic about the history of the Bennett Medal from New York. And it was produced in a class of high school students that I hosted at Offsite Storage. So it was kind of using art and history in a combination way. And myself and then one of our artists from Central Design hosted that event. It was really, really fun. There's also, as I said before, there's always research to do. Every time we use an object for an exhibition or for an event, I try and take the opportunity to conduct further research, or even if it's just posting a new, a new label online. So that the hat there, the fire hat there, the parade hat there, is a good example. That when I was producing labels for the catalog, for the public catalog, I noticed that this fire hat, that INA had it as Pennsylvania Company number 21, but on the back of it, which I didn't show in the picture, it says 12. It's in a keystone, it says 12. And so I reached out to Fireman's Hall because I figured you all would know best. And it might have been Bob Shea, I can't remember. I don't think it was you, Carol, but it was whoever was there probably about 7 years ago, and whoever answered the phone. And that started a long process where eventually we discovered that this is a Pennsylvania fire hat, and it did belong to a Philadelphia firefighter, but it was from San Francisco. That it was the fire hat, the uniform hat for a group that started the Pennsylvania Fire Company number 12 in San Francisco in 1852. So they were all or most of them former Philadelphia firefighters. They reconstituted under the burgeoning San Francisco Fire Company. The San Francisco Fire Company had very loose regulations about their uniforms, so they sent back to Philadelphia to have their hats made, to have their pumper made, and shipped out to them. So this may well be the last remaining artifact from that group. And it's one of the very few Western objects that I actually have in the collection. Exhibitions are also a great opportunity to do conservation. And one of our stars was this. It's essentially a helmet-shaped parade hat from Salem, Massachusetts. The top photo is how we received it. And after about 2 months of conservation, the bottom shows what it looks like. And none of that is restored painting, or if it is, it's very just touches. That is just what it looked like under about a century's worth of grime. So all that was stripped off, and you can see the result. And we probably have 3 or 4 candidates just like that that could use some real kind of amazing proactive conservation. In fact, my hope is to have the hat, the San Francisco hat, conserved, because on the top there's initials of the owner, but we can't read them. We can see that they're initials, but they're illegible. And so if we're able to expose those and read those, we might even be able to find out, because there's a record of original members whose hat it might be. But of course, we're in the museum business, so the main thing is exhibitions. And over the last 15 years, I've worked to get more and more fire history on the floor. These are the first 2 Cigna objects that were ever displayed. The hose carriage was displayed on the first floor, sort of in one of the main halls, and it actually replaced a 1965 Mustang that had been on display before it. So a little bit of a change there. The helmet was part of a collection of hats that was put on display at the Air and Space Museum. Actually, when we were closed for renovation, we had kind of a satellite exhibit of kind of a best of exhibit to remind everybody that we were still around. And that fire hat, having only been in the collection for less than a year, made it into the show. But for the most part, exhibitions in the museum deal with larger themes in American history, so like really big themes like transportation or democracy or immigration. So it's very unlikely I'm ever going to get a major permanent show dedicated just to fire history. That's where museums like the Fireman's Hall come in. That's you need to tell that story on the everyday. It's basically as big a topic as it is, it's too narrow a topic for us. So we have these huge exhibits where we look at lots of multifaceted areas of American history, and fire history is one of those facets. So fire objects often end up as part of larger exhibits. So here, that's our 1753 contribution ship fire mark, and it's in a case in our exhibit called Many Voices, One Nation, that talks about colonial Pennsylvania and different affiliations at the time, different organizations. And so it's complementing that overall story. Right now, there's fire objects, including that Halligan from my New York firefighter, in our hands-on science lab, and that's to support a theme of innovation, innovations that protect us, inventions that help keep us safe. But that being said, at the moment, I've got two small displays that are specifically looking at fire history, and I'll show you these and end on this. The first is the Philadelphia-style hand pumper that you see there. That's from the Washington Fire Company in Wilmington, Delaware. It dates to about 1842. I told you about it. It came with no wheels on it. There you see the picture with no wheels. It looks like it was left in a bad part of town, but it was definitely a chore getting it rigged and moved. When we finally decided to put it on display, we did have a full rigging crew come in, ship it into the museum. Our move crew put it on go jacks, took it to our big elevator and put it in the center of the floor. It basically went into the middle of the first floor concourse with a Conestoga wagon, kind of as twin objects. And since that time, it's been to 3 more areas in the museum. We just can't get rid of it. We love it too much. So, and actually, it's funny. Right before we shut down, I mean, days before we shut down in March, it had just been reinstalled in its latest location, and that has never been open to the public. We closed before that space was opened, and so tomorrow might be the first time that anybody from the public will see it in its new space. So I'm sort of excited to see think. And then finally, the other display is on the first floor artifact walls. They're normally used as a kind of open storage, but when we have specific exhibits that are kind of targeted and more interpretive, we call those history highlights. There's always 2 or 3 within those walls, and this one that I did, Always Ready, focuses on the major changes in American firefighting between 1800 and 1870. Well, basically, we go from, the public making bucket brigades to help put out fires with simple pumpers, to through the volunteer era, through organizations that select from members of the community, but the public is more and more at a remove from the firefighting experience, and then finally to the municipal era, the advent of paid firefighting, the advent of steamers, and another sort of major shift in the way firefighting is practiced in America. And the key for this exhibit is kind of, I was sort of hoping visitors would look at it and kind of ask themselves what they would do, where they would be in case of a fire in any of these periods. Would they be in a bucket line in 1800, or by 1870, would they just be reading about the latest fire in the morning's paper? Within 70 years, there's in major cities, it's that radically different. So that concludes the presentation, and I know I've gone on for a bit here. So let me get rid of that, and I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have about anything at all.
Tim, thank you so much. That was just such a great overview, and I will start off the questions. How will space constrain your ability to collect as you move forward? Can you take in a 1980s fire truck?
If I would love to, I've been offered one. Space is a major concern, as it is for any museum, and it is for us. And so, ideally, space is always a consideration, but shouldn't be the final determining factor. I wouldn't want to turn down, this some unbelievable object, from any object just because we didn't think we had space for it. But in effect, yes, if I went into my collections committee and said I want to, I don't know, I've got a Mac pumper that someone's offering, and it's huge. I don't think I would succeed there. What it does then is it obviously we have such an extensive collection of fire apparatus, 15 or 16 full-size vehicles of various sizes, but the newest of them are from the 1920s. So, if I could begin to pick and choose and swap, do we need an Aaron's Fox and a LaFrance from the 20s? Could we trade that for something from the 70s or 80s? But that's just not really feasible for these accessioned objects. So it's one of those things where it's going to require an investment in infrastructure and space before I think we can practically look to acquire more modern apparatus. And what it'll probably be is it'll have to be the representative piece of equipment, from whatever era, like, what was everybody using in every department in 1985? It can't be this specialized, piece of equipment that only 2 companies used and then they stopped making it, kind of thing. So it'll be, when we're able to do that, it'll also narrow the focus of what we can actually collect. And then, of course, it's some of it's about opportunity. And so, if a fire company offers something and we can make an argument for it, I'd rather receive something too that I can tell the story of its use, and not buy something, off of eBay. I mean, I don't want to buy a fire engine off of eBay anyway, but you know what I mean. If I can get, the crew's story of using it, if I can get people's experience of operating it and seeing service with it, that enriches the story rather than just getting, and that goes for every artifact that we get.
If someone asked you what your favorite object was, what would it be?
I don't know if you remember earlier, but there was that little 2-person hand pumper, and it was on display. It was on display. I guess it was at Cigna or one of their properties. It's a tiny little hand tub. I mean, tiny, and it really is just a 2-person thing. And there's 2 reasons I like it. One is INA put a number of their objects on loan to the National Museum before my museum existed back in the 50s and early 60s, when the National Museum was based in what we now call the Museum of Science and what do we call it? The Science and Industry Building, which is right next to the castle. And you can see in old pictures, you can see all these. I mean, I recognize half the stuff. I've got some of the apparatus. All these things had once been at the Smithsonian and have come back again. And this little hand tub is one of those. And somehow, some way, it was labeled when it was at the Smithsonian as the oldest existing fire engine in the United States. We think it's probably like a junior's apparatus, something like that. It certainly is not the oldest fire apparatus in the United States. So that's one reason I like it. And the other reason I like it is it has its motto on the side. And again, this is the tiniest little thing. And the motto it's actually, I guess, on the back, and it says, "We'll try." That's their motto. And it's like, yeah, with a small little thing like that, I bet the best you can do is be honest and say, "We'll try."
Well, Tim, I don't see any more questions for you. I did see one comment where someone can't wait to get on and try to play with the website and see what's there. And another comment that they can't wait to visit the museum. So,
well, good. Well, like I said, the museum opens tomorrow to the public. It's an experiment, but other Smithsonian facilities have opened as well. So we're hopeful that limiting crowds and obviously having social distancing and mandatory masking and things like that will help bring audiences back. But I definitely recommend going online and doing some searching and some sleuthing through there. That's where you can help correct any errors that have slipped in, whether they were mine or INA's. And I probably get at least one a month of somebody contacting and saying, no, this was probably this fire company, or maybe there was a transposition of letters, or sometimes it's simply just a typo. But your expertise helps us make sure that we're telling the right story, that we're telling the right facts. And the whole reason for opening up the catalog to the public in its entirety is to begin this dialogue and to begin this conversation and allow our audience to help contribute to our knowledge, right? So definitely have a look. There's loads of stuff there. I'm trying to think how many objects. I mean, it's got to be, in total, there's probably 800,000 objects on there, and maybe more. So, obviously not all mine, but it's a good way to spend some time.
Tim, apparently Harry Mickey has his hand raised. So, okay. Lisa, can you unmute Harry?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Hey, Tim, how are you? I just wanted to say hello, and I really enjoyed the presentation. It's great to see, and it's nice to see that you've brought your work so far along.
Thank you. Yeah, it has been. I mean, it's been a learning curve for me. This 15 years in, and I'm still learning something every day about it. But we've really put a lot of attention on the fire collection, and my hope is perhaps at some point to have an exhibition. Again, probably a temporary exhibition, probably not particularly large one, but we do have some new temporary spaces that have opened up in the last few years of our redevelopment, and I would hope, maybe by 2030s, when we're looking at the anniversary of Union Fire Company or something like that, maybe I can get something proposed and done. But I'm always pushing to have fire history represented on the floor as much as possible.
That's great.
Well, and I know those of us who have been able to come down and see some of your exhibits really can appreciate the depth of the collection. And it's nice to see that they aren't just the Cigna engines that we all saw in that building on 16th and Arch Street aren't shut away permanently, that they come out every once in a while.
Oh yeah, yeah. We've had I said the hose carriage, and now the pumper's been out for several years. There's a few models in the exhibit. I'm trying to think if we've put out another one. I'm just trying to think. I know there's a couple, and of course, there's the older ones on loan. Yeah, those two have been really popular. And I think the next time we get, right now in that space where the pumper used to be, where it started, we have the Batmobile from the 1989 Tim Burton movie, and which is cool. I love it. But there may be, I think, if in the future there's another call, I would love to see our Aaron's Fox out there, perhaps, or perhaps the Silsby steamer, which could really use some work, and so that would be a good excuse to get some work done on it. There's an appeal. I mean, everybody here knows there's an appeal to fire vehicles and fire apparatus, and that's why we still parade them, and that's why we still exhibit them. And so I think that Philadelphia pumper, I like where it is right now, but it has gone further and further and deeper in the museum, and you kind of have to seek it out now. So it's lost that pride of place where it was on the middle of the first floor, and I kind of part of me just wants to get that back at some point. So I will try and wow someone in the future with our lovely Aaron's Fox.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your story of how it's all coming together. And we'll look forward to hearing more, especially with your research in African American firefighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm very hopeful to do some collecting around that very soon. So, certainly if anybody, oh, hang on, I didn't do, 1 sec. Can you share my screen again? I was supposed to put this up too.
Is this our little commercial announcement?
Yeah, hang on, let me do that for you.
We are so happy that you were all able to be with us today, and that you were able to join us for the first of our virtual membership programs. And it looks as though this might be continuing for a while. So you can follow us on social media, and here are our different addresses. The museum is now open to the public. Brian, do you want to tell folks how to make their reservation?
Sure, you can go on our website, firemanshallmuseum.org, and make your reservation. Come down. The hours are still 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday.
And of course, we always are happy to have new members. So please check out our website, firemanshallmuseum.org. We have lots of new material up there. And thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. It was really fun to go through it again. It's kind of like going down memory lane.
Good to see you, Brian.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Great to see you. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Take care, Tim.
Bye now.
And Tim, there's some chat comments you might just want to read, which is kind of fun. Yeah.
Let's see. Ooh, how do I bring my chats up?